The sun beat down like punishment. On the center divider of Highway 78, 5 cream-colored golden retriever puppies hung by ropes from a metal fence. Necks chafed, bodies limp, paws barely brushing the blistering concrete. No shade, no sound, just the stillness of pain and the world rushing past. But one man, a tired road worker with nothing left to lose, stopped. He didn't look away. What happened next will shake you and heal something in you. Have you ever witnessed something so cruel you couldn't stay silent? Comment below with your story, or simply say, "I would have stopped too." And join us as we follow a miraculous survival and seek justice for the voiceless. The sun was already unforgiving when Elijah Moore stepped off the gravel shoulder of Highway 78, the dry heat settling on his skin like a punishment. It was only a little after 6 a.m., but the sky was cloudless and pale, the kind of pale that warned of another brutal Texas day. The road shimmered with a mirage of movement, though nothing stirred but the distant hum of an approaching freight truck and the hiss of cicadas in the brush. Elijah adjusted the fraying strap of the satchel slung over his shoulder, its canvas sagging with the weight of empty soda cans and bits of twisted copper wire he'd scavenged from roadside debris. He wore a long-sleeved shirt, bleached nearly colorless from the sun, its cuffs rolled up to reveal arms as lean and corded as old tree branches. His jeans were ripped at the knees, and his steel-toe boots bore more duct tape than leather. He walked with a slight limp, not from injury, but from time and habit, the accumulation of years spent kneeling on rooftops, climbing telephone poles, and dragging his tools across blistering asphalt. At 49, Elijah carried the look of a man built by labor. His face was carved in the angles of someone who had once smiled often, but hadn't found the occasion lately. His eyes were a deep, pensive brown, set beneath thick brows and sun-weathered skin. A scruff of silver-black beard grew unevenly across his jaw. People who met him tended to assume he didn't talk much, and they were right. Elijah had once had a family, a house with a roof that didn't leak, a wife who sang while she washed dishes, a boy named Daniel who would sneak into bed after nightmares. But life, as it often does, had taken a hard turn. A drunk driver ran a red light 6 years ago, and Daniel didn't make it out of the crumpled metal. Elijah had been stuck on a utility job 2 towns away, unreachable. He'd driven back faster than he ever had in his life. But when he got to the hospital, the nurse wouldn't let him in. "He's gone," she'd said, with a face practiced in silence. He never forgot the feel of that moment. The way the light was too bright in the hallway, the way the smell of antiseptic clung to his clothes for days. Since then, Elijah hadn't returned to that town. He lived in an old pickup truck parked behind a forgotten warehouse on the edge of Dune Hollow. The truck's engine had died 2 summers ago, the AC even earlier. He could have stayed in a shelter maybe, but there was a dignity in isolation that no bunk bed ever offered. He worked night shifts now, installing fiber lines in unfinished developments. When the shift ended, he would walk the highway shoulders, scavenging for recyclables to make a few extra bucks, enough for a lukewarm coffee and fuel for the tiny propane stove he used to heat cans of soup. That morning was supposed to be like all the others, the familiar rhythm of exhaustion, sweat, and quiet. But something felt different as he passed the overpass near mile marker 42. Maybe it was the silence. No bird song, no tires screeching, no dogs barking in the distance. Just an aching hush, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath his boots. Then he saw it. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Down the median, about 20 feet ahead, a cluster of pale shapes dangled from the chain-link fence that separated the lanes of the highway. They hung at varying heights, some near the base, others higher. Motionless, Elijah's steps slowed, his breath caught. He squinted against the glare of the sun as it crested over the horizon, bathing the scene in a light too golden to be kind. The shapes were limp, furred. Puppies, 5 of them. Cream-colored, no older than a month. Their tiny bodies hung from rough loops of rope tied tightly around their necks, the cords straining from the top of the fence like crude nooses. One pup's tongue hung grotesquely from the side of its mouth. Another twitched slightly, then fell still again. Elijah froze, his entire body recoiling in some instinctive horror. He stared at the scene, unable to process the cruelty. His satchel slid from his shoulder and hit the pavement with a clatter, but he didn't hear it. The sun beat down mercilessly now, glinting off the ropes, casting elongated shadows of small paws and unmoving tails across the ground. There was no note, no sign of water or food, just suffering, just abandonment. And then something ancient shifted in Elijah's chest. Not rage, not yet, but something quieter, heavier, a memory, summoned like a ghost. The hospital hallway, the locked doors, the look on the nurse's face. He had been too late once, too slow to save his boy. He remembered the drive, the tires screaming against the asphalt, the way the heat rose from the hood like smoke. He remembered running inside, screaming Daniel's name, demanding answers, clawing at a world that had already closed its doors. And now, 6 years later, he was standing on another hot road, watching death arrive again. This time wearing golden fur and tiny broken collars. Something inside him snapped back into motion. He didn't think. He just ran. Elijah reached the fence just as the smallest pup gave a final weak twitch. Up close, the scene was even worse than he imagined. The ropes had been tied with brutal precision, thick, coarse, and high enough off the ground that the puppies had barely any contact with the earth beneath them. Their paws were raw from scraping against concrete, their cream-colored fur matted with sweat, dirt, and something darker that stuck to his fingers. Dried blood or oil, he couldn't tell. The heat radiating off the pavement made the smell unbearable, a sour mixture of sun-baked filth, panic, and slow death. He didn't hesitate. Dropping to his knees, he pulled out the utility blade he kept clipped to his belt. Old, rusted at the hinge, but sharp enough to sever a thick rope. He started with the one on the far left, a pup with a splash of white above its nose and a swollen, rope-burned neck. As the body slumped into his arms, it let out a broken gasp. It was still alive. One by one, he worked his way down the line, slicing through each loop with trembling hands. The second pup, heavier than the first, was eerily quiet but warm. The third whimpered as he caught it, its head lolling backward, eyes rolled up. The fourth kicked weakly when he lifted it, surprising strength in such a small body. And then came the last. She was the smallest by far. Her fur was pale gold, almost ivory, and her left ear folded forward in a soft, uneven curl. He touched her belly. No movement. He pressed 2 fingers gently to her ribs. Still. Elijah swallowed hard. He stared at her for a second too long, his throat thick with something unspoken. She looked too much like Daniel's puppy from years ago. Lucy, a rescue mutt with a crooked tail and one bent ear, the dog they'd promised would grow old with them. But Lucy had been struck by a car before her first birthday, just like Daniel had been taken too soon. This pup looked like memory molded from fur and bone. He should have chosen the strongest first, the one still crying, the one that might live. But he couldn't. Not again. He scooped the last one into his arms and bundled all 5 pups in his faded flannel shirt, pressing them to his chest, as if warmth alone could will them back to life. The sweat ran into his eyes as he stumbled backward from the fence, boots crunching the gravel shoulder. His truck was nearly a half-mile down the road, parked behind an abandoned diner with boarded-up windows and a roof that sagged like a broken spine. He hadn't run in years, not since he gave up chasing things that left. And then a voice called out behind him. "You all right there?" He turned and squinted into the glare. A woman approached from across the highway, her steps brisk and careful. She was in her late 50s, tall, with a strong frame softened by age. Her silver-streaked brown hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail beneath a faded army cap. She wore a maroon windbreaker over a gray shirt that read, "Veterans for Compassion," and she carried a reusable water bottle in one hand and a leash in the other, though there was no dog at the end of it. Her name was Clara Whitmore, a retired nurse who had spent 15 years working the night shift at a VA hospital before her husband, a decorated Marine, died of a sudden aneurysm one morning while making coffee. Since then, she walked every day, miles before sunrise, always along the highway, always alone. Elijah had seen her once or twice before, never more than a passing silhouette. Now she was standing 10 feet away, watching him cradle 5 barely breathing puppies in his arms like a man carrying his own grief. He opened his mouth to say something, but couldn't. Clara stepped closer, her voice quieter now. "Are they alive?" "Some of them," Elijah muttered, eyes still locked on the smallest one, not sure for how long. Clara didn't hesitate. She knelt beside him and opened her bottle, pouring a bit into the palm of her hand. "Here, drip this on their tongues. Just a little. If they can swallow, they can fight." He nodded, working quickly, his hands steadier under direction. Clara watched him as he worked, saw the care in his movements, the way he whispered to the animals like they were children waking from nightmares. "You got somewhere to take them?" she asked. "My truck," he said, jerking his chin toward the diner. "Can't drive it, been living in it. Closest vet's probably the one on 5th, but that's too far on foot." Clara stood, wiped her hands on her jacket. "I know someone. She owes me a favor. Stay with them. I'll be back." He started to argue, but she was already moving, crossing the highway like she'd done it 1,000 times. A few minutes later, a small silver sedan pulled up to the shoulder, kicking up dust. Clara waved him over. "Come on, front seat, keep 'em close." Elijah hesitated only a moment, then climbed in, keeping the flannel bundle pressed to his chest. The smallest pup shifted against his ribs, and his heart nearly broke with hope. Clara drove like a woman who didn't believe in wasting time. As they sped down the back roads, Elijah finally spoke. "Why are you helping?" Clara didn't take her eyes off the road. "My husband used to say you don't get to choose the moments that define you. You just choose how you show up when they do." She glanced at him. "You showed up. That matters." They arrived 10 minutes later at a low-slung, mustard-colored building with peeling paint and a crooked sign that read, "Bright Paws Veterinary." The parking lot was empty. Clara beeped twice. The side door opened, and a woman in blue scrubs stepped out, frowning. She was in her early 40s, short and slim, with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in years. Her hair was clipped in a utilitarian bob, streaked with early gray. Her name was Dr. Rachel Min, and she ran the clinic alone on most days, working pro bono for rescues and low-income families. A second-generation Vietnamese American, Rachel had once been on track to run a private practice in Dallas until a house fire claimed her brother's life and left her emotionally gutted. She'd left the city and never looked back. Rachel took one look at Elijah's face, then at the bundle in his arms, and nodded. "Inside. Now." Clara stayed behind to park while Elijah followed Rachel through the swinging doors into the exam room. The sterile smell hit him immediately. Clean, clinical, unforgiving. Rachel snapped on gloves and began examining the puppies one by one, her movements fast but gentle. "This one's critical," she said, pointing to the runt. "We need to warm her up and get fluids in her stat." Elijah watched, helpless. "You can save them?" Rachel didn't look up. "Some of them, if they want to live." He sat down on a bench in the corner, soaked in sweat, his shirt half off, his heart beating louder than the clock on the wall. The smallest pup, Honey Ear, he'd started calling her in his head, shuddered once, then went still. Elijah leaned forward, whispering under his breath, "Don't leave, not yet." He'd lost too many things to let one more slip away. The clinic room buzzed with a quiet urgency. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor blended with the rustling of gloves, paper towels, and IV tubes. Dr. Rachel Min moved with swift precision across the small space, her brow furrowed in focused determination. The smallest puppy, Honey Ear, lay on a warming pad under a soft towel, her shallow breathing barely registering. Next to her, the other 4 pups rested on fleece-lined trays, each hooked to a slender IV line, delivering a careful balance of fluids, glucose, and antibiotics. Elijah sat against the wall, his fingers laced together, knuckles pale. He hadn't spoken much since entering the clinic. The dried sweat on his forehead had given way to a cold sheen of dread. He wasn't used to this kind of waiting. In his world, things either broke or they didn't. There wasn't usually a middle ground. Dr. Min gave the tiniest of nods as she stepped away from the exam table. "They're stabilizing. I've seen worse cases, but that doesn't mean they're safe yet." "They're fighting?" Elijah asked, his voice low and rough. "Yes," Rachel replied, removing her gloves. "Especially the little one. She was almost gone, but she's trying." Just then the door pushed open, and Clara stepped in carrying a tray of styrofoam coffee cups and a paper bag. Her hair had come undone a little from the brisk drive, and a few silver strands framed her stern, tired face. Her windbreaker was open now, revealing a navy blue shirt tucked into khaki pants and a bronze pendant shaped like a hummingbird that glinted as she moved. "Brought coffee," she said, placing the tray on a metal counter. "And a few biscuits I stole from a gas station's better half." Rachel gave her a tired smirk. "You always come bearing food. You're the only reason half the staff here doesn't pass out before lunch." Clara smiled faintly but didn't respond. She moved beside Elijah and gently handed him a cup. "You should drink something. They'll need you steady if anything turns." Elijah accepted it without a word, his eyes still locked on the warming pad where Honey Ear lay. He didn't drink. Rachel glanced over. "She needs a name. They all do. It helps. It grounds them and you." Elijah looked at her, confused. "They've been stripped of identity," Rachel continued. "Whoever did this treated them like trash. Giving them names says, you matter. Trust me, it's not just for you. It's for them." Elijah looked back at the pups. The second largest one, with a small white blaze between his eyes, stirred and let out a sleepy whimper. Another, lanky and long-limbed, was chewing weakly on the corner of a towel. He stood, crossed to them slowly, and rested a hand on the edge of the table. He nodded toward the one with the white blaze. "Buddy," he said. "That one's Buddy." He pointed to the lanky one, whose legs looked a size too big for his tiny body. "Dusty." A third pup, curled into a perfect circle, barely moving, had a soft stripe of darker fur down his back. "That one's Theo." Then his eyes settled on the only female besides Honey Ear. She had round eyes, thick lashes, and a certain stillness about her that reminded him of Clara, Maple. Finally, he stepped to the runt. Her breathing was shallow but even. He touched her paw gently. "Honey Ear. She gets to keep that name." Dr. Min scribbled the names down on patient charts without comment, but her eyes flicked up and met Elijah's. There was something like approval there, quiet, subtle. Clara leaned against the windowsill and sipped her coffee. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, almost absently, she murmured, "You know, I used to work in a shelter. Not the county one, the old one that got shut down." Rachel turned slightly. "You never told me that." Clara didn't look up. "I don't tell a lot of things anymore." She paused, as if unsure whether to continue. But something about the quiet in the room, the way Elijah sat, listening without judgment, opened something in her. "It was about 15 years back. I'd just left the VA. I was tired of hospitals, tired of death. The shelter gave me something to fight for that didn't come with a DNR tag." Rachel was still. Elijah waited. "There was a training program, canine units, behavioral rehab. Some of the dogs were rescue cases from broken homes. Others were surplus from breeders or police departments, but not all of it was legal. I found out about a shipment, purebreds, some just weeks old, getting pushed through under the table to a private military contractor. Unlicensed. No oversight. Just dogs turned into property." She looked down at her cup. "I reported it. And 2 weeks later, my file disappeared, my shifts were cut, and then one day my locker was cleaned out, and the building had a new lock on the door. No formal firing. Just silence." Rachel cursed under her breath. "You never went public?" Clara shook her head. "I had no proof. And my husband had just passed. I didn't have the strength to fight the system, and my grief at the same time." The room fell quiet again. "Do you think these 5?" Rachel asked. Clara nodded slowly. "The ropes, the ears, the markings. This isn't someone tossing puppies because they couldn't sell them. This feels like cleanup, like someone clearing out rejects." Elijah's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his side. "You think someone tried to kill them because they failed a test?" "Or because they weren't aggressive enough, or didn't follow command," Clara said. Rachel stood. "If that's true, we need to report this. The police, the county, someone." "No," Elijah said firmly. "Not yet. Not until we know who did it." He turned toward the window, where the morning sun was breaking over the roof. The light cast a gold shimmer across the metal trays, making the pups glow. "I've already lost too many things without answers. I'm not letting this go." Rachel glanced at Clara. "Then we start small. I can run the chip scans. If these dogs were ever registered, legally or otherwise, we might find a trail. And I'll reach out to some old names," Clara added, her voice steadier now. "There are still a few people out there who owe me calls." Elijah looked at the puppies again. Dusty yawned. Buddy shifted closer to Maple. Theo stretched one leg stiffly, and Honey Ear gave a twitch that made his heart stop, then soar. They were alive, and now they had names. Names meant they were no longer invisible, and that meant someone would have to answer for what they did. The desert wind had a strange way of carrying silence. It crept across the roads, into the trees, brushing against windows like a forgotten breath. Elijah stood outside Bright Paw's veterinary clinic, with his hands on his hips, squinting against the late afternoon sun. His shirt clung to him with sweat, dust caking the knees of his jeans, and his eyes were focused on the van parked across the lot. Sarah's van, to be exact. The woman herself was inside, leaning over the dashboard, tapping notes into her phone with a practiced intensity. Dr. Sarah Kendrick was not the type to be underestimated. In her early 60s, she was lean and upright, with sharp shoulders and sharper words. Her white lab coat rarely stayed clean for more than 10 minutes, and she wore steel-rimmed glasses that magnified eyes that missed nothing. Her jaw was square, her mouth perpetually tightened, in something between determination and fatigue. She had once served as a field medic in a NATO peacekeeping mission overseas, a chapter of her life she never spoke of, but that lived in her bone-deep distrust of bureaucracies. Since returning to the States, she had buried herself in small-town veterinary work, focusing on the cases others overlooked. That day, her focus was the chip data extracted from the puppies: Buddy, Dusty, Theo, Maple, and Honey Ear. "I've run the scans through 3 different databases," she said as Elijah climbed into the passenger seat. Nothing official on any of them, but 2 of the chips had identical formatting patterns, private encoding. Not government, not rescue, something else. "Commercial?" Elijah asked. "Possibly. But I know this sequence," she continued, flipping her phone around to show him a long line of digits. "See this prefix? I've seen this before. About 2 years ago, we had a seizure case from a failed breeding operation. One of the dogs had this exact chip prefix. We traced it to a private K-9 facility, Redstone, out near Ash Creek. It was shut down after a local investigation." "Shut down," Elijah echoed. "But not gone?" "Depends on how you define gone," Sarah muttered. That evening, they took Elijah's beat-up Ford Ranger out of storage behind the diner. The engine wheezed, but it roared to life after a few minutes of coaxing. With the sun bleeding into the hills, they headed west, past the new subdivisions and empty fields until the paved road gave way to gravel, and eventually to a red clay path that wound through a grove of dead mesquite trees. Dust kicked up behind them, settling into the windshield wipers and dashboard cracks. They arrived at Redstone as twilight was taking hold. The facility was set behind a sagging chain-link fence, the entrance secured with a padlock that looked new, its metal still gleaming. The sign had been torn down, but faint lettering still scarred the cinder-block wall near the gate. A small building stood just beyond it, squat and silent, with 2 large kennels out back. One collapsed, the other eerily intact. From a distance, it looked abandoned, but Elijah had lived among ruins long enough to know when something was pretending to be dead. They parked 100 feet down the road, hidden by a patch of scrub brush. Sarah raised binoculars. 2 tire tracks, fresh, probably within the last 12 hours. Elijah scanned the structure, and that motion sensor above the side doors blinking. Sarah's face tightened. They're still operating. Quietly. They didn't approach that night. Instead, they watched. For nearly 2 hours, nothing stirred except a jackrabbit and a hawk circling above. But just as they were about to leave, headlights appeared down the long dirt drive. A black SUV pulled into the lot. A man climbed out, tall and broad, wearing a dark jacket and gloves despite the heat. He carried something, a large plastic tub, and disappeared inside. Elijah watched, his jaw clenched. "This place is supposed to be shut down," Sarah nodded. "Looks like someone forgot to tell them." They returned the next day in broad daylight, under the guise of hiking nearby. From the ridge above the facility, they spotted a small dirt path veering off from the main compound, leading to a nearby trailer park. It was there that they first met Luis. Luis Martinez was 13, wiry and quick, with skin the color of dark caramel and a mop of curly black hair, always in need of a trim. He wore a threadbare hoodie, cargo shorts, and carried a second-hand phone with a cracked screen. His sneakers were scuffed, his palms always slightly dirty, and he had a tendency to talk too fast when nervous. But behind his constant chatter was a quick mind and eyes that noticed more than they let on. Elijah had crouched by the trail, checking for tracks, when Luis popped out from behind a pile of old tires. "You're not lost," the boy had said confidently. "You're watching Redstone, huh?" Sarah froze. Elijah looked up, startled. Luis grinned. "Don't worry, I'm not a snitch." "You live nearby?" Elijah asked cautiously. "Yeah, me and my abuela, 2 trailers down." He gestured toward a cluster of rusting RVs. "She's old and mostly blind. Thinks the coyotes are Jesus testing her faith." Sarah smirked despite herself. Luis continued. "I used to go there, Redstone. I'd sneak in sometimes. The back fence has a spot where the chain is loose. The dogs used to bark like crazy, but not anymore." "Why not?" Elijah asked. "They're quieter now. Less of them, too. Mostly puppies. Not trained ones. The man that comes in the black truck, he doesn't stay long. Always leaves with crates." Elijah's stomach turned. Luis pulled out his phone and swiped through videos. One showed the compound at night, the interior lit up. Another caught the man's face, partially obscured by shadows. But it was the third clip that made Elijah lean closer. It showed a group of small dogs, golden-furred, one with a crooked ear, pressed against the fence, looking out with wide, glassy eyes. Sarah whispered, "That's Honey Ear?" Luis looked surprised. "You know her?" Elijah nodded. "She's with us now." Luis smiled, proud of himself. "Cool. I called her Peanut." "Luis," Sarah said slowly, "do your videos have timestamps?" The boy nodded. "Yeah, I always upload them to my TikTok. Got like 300 followers. Not viral, but, Sarah traded a glance with Elijah. "These might be more valuable than you think." Back at the clinic, Sarah and Elijah reviewed the footage again. Between the timestamps, vehicle models, and chip data, a web was beginning to take shape. Thin threads pointing back to someone with resources, connections, and something to hide. Later that night, after they dropped Luis off with his grandmother and gave him strict instructions to stay away from Redstone for now, Elijah sat on the clinic's back steps beside Honey Ear. She was still weak, but her eyes were clearer now, and her tail thumped gently when he stroked her side. Clara joined him, a mug of tea in her hand. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. "We're getting close," she said softly. "Close to what?" Elijah muttered. Clara looked out at the dusk settling over the town. To something buried that never should have been. Elijah hadn't slept. Not really. Not since the day they pulled the puppies off the fence. The kind of rest that came now was shallow and restless. Flashes of memory woven with glimpses of Honey Ear's tiny ribs rising and falling like she was still fighting to belong in a world that had nearly thrown her away. But tonight, as he crouched behind a rusted water tank on the northern edge of Redstone K9 facility, his exhaustion vanished, replaced with something sharper: focus. The moon was high but veiled by thin clouds, casting a muted glow across the scrubland. The wind was still, heavy with the scent of iron and dirt. Elijah adjusted the straps of the old hiking backpack on his shoulders, packed with a flashlight, gloves, wire cutters, and 2 bottles of water. At his side, crouched low and breathing quietly through gritted teeth, was Luis. The boy wore a black hoodie with the sleeves pushed up and jeans frayed at the hems. He had wrapped his phone in electrical tape to reduce glare, holding it like a badge of purpose. Despite the shadows and adrenaline, there was excitement in his eyes. For him, this wasn't just dangerous, it was important. Real. "I know where they bury stuff," Luis whispered. "Come on, but we gotta crawl." They slipped through a loose panel of the chain-link fence, just as Luis had promised. The ground beyond was uneven, riddled with weeds and old concrete chunks from demolished kennels. In the distance, a single floodlight illuminated the main training shed. The rest of the property lay in eerie silence. Luis led Elijah to a shallow rise near the back of the property, behind a leaning tool shed with faded military stenciling, still ghosting its sides. The boy dropped to his knees and began pulling aside a camouflage tarp hidden under dry brush. Underneath, the earth was disturbed, loose, clumped, and darker than the clay around it, the kind of dirt that hadn't been there long. Elijah knelt beside him and began to dig with his hands, fingers scraping through damp soil. Within seconds, something hard clinked against his knuckle. He brushed it clean, a small metal collar tag, engraved but scratched out. Another few inches revealed a tangled leash, crusted with dried mud, and something else. Next came a box, a cracked plastic storage container, half buried, lid half melted. Inside were 2 used syringes, an empty vial labeled Medexazolam, and a pair of leather muzzles, one chewed nearly in half. Elijah exhaled slowly, his breath thick with rage. He took out his phone and began snapping photos. Every tag, every tool, every vile fragment of the operation that had once run above ground and was now literally buried. Then they heard it. A door slammed in the distance. Boots, heavy, fast, crunched gravel from the direction of the shed. Luis froze. "Crap," he whispered. Elijah grabbed the boy's shoulder. "Run!" They dashed toward the fence, but Luis's sneaker caught on a loop of barbed wire, sending him sprawling. He cried out, grabbing his leg. Elijah turned back, hauled him up in one motion, and dragged him through the hole in the fence. A beam of light sliced through the dark behind them, a voice shouting, angry and close. They didn't look back. By the time they reached the truck, both were gasping, blood pumping too loud to think. Elijah tore off his gloves and checked Luis's leg. A clean cut across the shin, not deep, but bleeding freely. "You okay?" Luis nodded, face pale. "Worth it." Elijah stared at him. This kid who lived in a trailer park, raised by a grandmother who didn't know how deep he was, already tangled in a fight not meant for children. And yet, Luis hadn't hesitated. "You're braver than most grown men I've known," Elijah muttered, reaching for a first aid kit. They drove back in silence, save for the whir of tires on dust and the occasional hiss from Luis, as Elijah cleaned and bandaged the wound. Back at Bright Paws, Sarah was waiting. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, hair pulled into a sharp ponytail, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked tired, but not from the clinic, from something heavier. Elijah helped Luis inside, explaining the wound and the escape in clipped tones. Sarah listened, nodded, and sent Luis to lie down in the break room with a juice box and a stack of towels. When they were alone, she pulled Elijah aside. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice low. Elijah waited. "You remember the name Malcolm Day?" He nodded. "Head trainer at Redstone. Went silent after the shutdown." Sarah looked down. "He wasn't just the head trainer. He was protected." "By who?" "My ex-husband," she said bitterly. "Thomas Kendrick. Lieutenant at County Patrol, now Deputy Chief. Back when Redstone first came under review, he was the one who filed the incident reports. I trusted him. Then one night, I saw him meeting Malcolm after hours. I confronted him. He said there was no case, just noise, that people were too sentimental about dogs." Elijah clenched his jaw. "And you stayed silent?" "I tried to fight," she snapped. "I filed a complaint. It vanished. So did my hospital records from deployment. Suddenly I was unstable, unfit to testify." Her voice trembled for the first time since he'd met her. "I was erased, Elijah." The silence between them was electric. Sarah pulled out a file folder and handed it to him. Inside were copies, old notes, witness lists, vet reports with redacted fields. One document showed transfer orders for dogs marked non-compliant. No destinations listed. "I've kept everything I could salvage," she said, "but it's not enough on its own. Not until now." Elijah handed her the phone with the photos from the burial site. "Now it is." Later that night, Elijah stood in the back corridor of the clinic, staring through the glass at the recovery crates. The puppies were sleeping, limbs twitching in dreams. Honey Ear had moved to a sitting position for the first time, her eyes alert but still too tired to bark. Elijah rested his palm on the glass. He couldn't walk away anymore. Not now. Not when the dirt was fresh, and the collars still bore names no one had bothered to remember. "You're not trash," he whispered. Behind him, Clara stepped in from the shadows. "You're in this for the long haul, aren't you?" "I was never meant to be part of it," he said, "but it found me, and I can't let it go." Clara nodded, her face unreadable. "Then we make sure no one else gets buried." The folding chairs creaked beneath shifting weight and quiet tension. The old community hall, once used for square dances and retirement parties, was now filled with concerned citizens, fidgeting neighbors, and local press with notepads resting on crossed knees. Fluorescent lights buzzed above like hornets in a jar, and the air was thick with the scent of cheap coffee, dust, and something deeper. Anger, restrained but growing. Clara stood at the front of the room, her shoulders squared in a crisp navy blouse that matched the pendant she always wore, a small bronze hummingbird given to her by her late husband before his final deployment. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a bun, sharp as the words she had prepared but not yet spoken. Behind her, a whiteboard displayed a handwritten title in thick marker: Redstone Investigation Community Meeting. She cleared her throat. "Some of you know me," she began. "Some of you don't. My name is Clara Whitmore. I was a trauma nurse for 15 years. I've worked in VA hospitals, shelters, and emergency clinics. And for the last few weeks, I've been helping investigate what's left of a place called Redstone K9 Facility." There was a murmur, a few nods. Many in the room had heard rumors. Some dismissed them as conspiracy, others as someone else's problem. Clara clicked a remote. A projector stuttered to life behind her, displaying photos: the burial site, the used syringes, the scorched collars. Then a short video played. Luis's grainy footage of the black SUV arriving late at night, crates loaded under flickering light. Redstone was officially shut down last year, but it never stopped. What we've found suggests illegal breeding, unauthorized experimentation, and the systematic disposal of dogs deemed untrainable. These 5 puppies, she clicked again, showing a picture of Buddy, Maple, Dusty, Theo, and Honey Ear, lying on soft towels at the clinic, were found hanged along Highway 78. Someone wanted them gone quietly. Elijah stood in the back of the room, hands stuffed into the pockets of his weathered work jacket, his eyes scanning the crowd. There were familiar faces: people from the diner, the supply depot, a mail carrier who always gave him a nod. But tonight, their expressions had changed. Their brows were furrowed not with suspicion, but concern. When Clara gestured for him to speak, he hesitated. Then he walked slowly to the front and took her place. "I didn't come here to start anything," he said. "Hell, I didn't come here to speak at all. But I found them. I cut them down myself. And what I saw out there, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't some careless breeder. It was disposal. Purposeful. Cold." He paused, and for a moment his voice caught. Then he steadied. "I don't want revenge. I want accountability. I want whoever did this to know that this town pays attention, that we don't turn away anymore." There was silence. Then the first clap came, from Luis, seated in the front row beside his abuela, who wore oversized sunglasses and clutched her rosary with both hands. More claps followed, scattered, unsure. Then the room swelled with it, and Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. After the meeting, Sarah distributed copies of the files to 2 reporters from the Dune Hollow Sentinel, including Marjorie Pike, a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a nose for old secrets. Marjorie wore her press badge clipped to a green wool coat, and her notepad was already half filled before Clara had finished her opening speech. "Off the record," Marjorie said to Sarah as the crowd thinned, "there's a lot here. Too much for a single piece. I can run this if I get more names. Someone on the inside." Sarah's expression darkened. "You'll have them." That same afternoon, back at Bright Paws, a luxury SUV pulled into the lot. The woman who stepped out wore a pale cashmere sweater, white jeans, and sandals with polished gold buckles. She was in her mid-30s, blonde, thin, and styled like she was expecting a camera to follow her at all times. Her name was Courtney Jameson, and she didn't believe in doors staying closed for long. She pushed through the clinic entrance with a designer bag slung over one shoulder, followed by her husband, Eric, a tall man with a tanned plastic smile and a navy blazer over a muscle shirt. They looked around the waiting room like it offended them. Courtney approached the front desk, where Clara, temporarily covering reception, looked up with measured politeness. "We saw the story online," Courtney began, flipping her phone around to display an Instagram reel of the puppies. "We think it would be just adorable to adopt one of the survivors, preferably the one with the floppy ear." Clara's tone remained neutral. "They're still recovering. We're not placing them just yet." Courtney gave a practiced laugh. "Oh, I don't mean now, but soon. We'd give her the best life. We've got a pool, and our daughter's TikTok gets like 80K views per video. You'd be surprised how many rescues get adopted once they go viral." Eric added, "We'd make her an ambassador. Awareness is everything." Elijah had been walking down the hall and caught the exchange. He stepped into the room, dirt still clinging to the cuffs of his pants, and stared at the couple with slow-burning intensity. "No," he said flatly. Courtney blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," Elijah repeated, stepping forward. "That pup was found half dead with a noose around her neck. She's not a mascot, not a prop. She doesn't need an audience. She needs someone who gives a damn whether she breathes, not whether she trends." Eric raised an eyebrow. "You work here?" "No," Clara cut in, "but he's the reason she's alive." Courtney stiffened. "Well, maybe this place doesn't deserve the exposure." She turned sharply and stormed out, heels clicking on the tile. Eric followed, glancing back with a shrug. When the doors closed, Clara didn't move right away. She just stared at the space the couple had occupied and murmured, "You don't just save a life, you protect its dignity." That night, Elijah sat beside Honey Ear's crate. She was stronger now, able to stand, her tail giving soft, slow wags. Her eyes followed him wherever he moved. Clara joined him, carrying a small stack of mail and a clipboard. The county investigator called. They're sending a team, and an independent animal welfare group wants to launch a full audit of Redstone's property records. We're not alone anymore. Elijah gave a quiet nod. From her spot nearby, Sarah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Silence doesn't protect anyone," she said. "It just gives cruelty room to grow." And for the first time in years, Elijah believed that justice, however slow, had finally started to stir. The sky had turned an eerie shade of steel by the time the unmarked vehicles pulled off the state highway and rumbled up the winding clay path toward Redstone. A storm was coming, not yet here, but present in the air. Thick, electric, unsettling. Elijah stood by the clinic's rear fence, watching the treetops bend with the first hints of wind. His shirt clung to his back, though the temperature had dropped. It wasn't sweat this time, it was tension, anticipation. The raid had been approved in less than 72 hours, a combination of community pressure, mounting media attention, and the carefully compiled evidence handed over by Clara and Sarah had forced the authorities to act. But Elijah knew the system didn't move because of truth. It moved because it had been cornered. Deputy Marshal Andrea Collins led the operation. A no-nonsense woman in her late 40s with storm-gray eyes and a voice that didn't rise above what it needed to. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with short-cut black hair peppered with streaks of silver, and a scar above her left eyebrow from a fall during a sting operation years back. She wore tactical boots, fitted canvas pants, and a Kevlar vest over a dark green shirt. Everything about her said function over form. "This is a clean sweep," she told the assembled team outside the gates of Redstone. "No warning, no hesitation. We've got probable cause, we've got witness statements, and we've got a judge who's tired of dog killers getting off on technicalities." Elijah wasn't allowed inside the compound once the sweep began. He stayed at the perimeter with Sarah and Clara, watching through binoculars as the gates were cut open and agents flooded the property. Dogs barked, voices shouted. Within minutes, officers began emerging with crates, some filled with trembling puppies, others with empty syringes, documents, flash drives, and boxes marked with red tape. Clara crossed herself when the first litter was brought out. Barely 6 weeks old, trembling and wide-eyed, their fur stained with old blood and grease. "They're alive," she said under her breath. "God, they're alive." At the center of it all, flanked by 2 deputies, stood Malcolm Day. He was shorter than Elijah had expected. Maybe 5'8", stocky but softening with age. Late 50s, with thinning blonde hair slicked back with oil and a gut that strained against his flannel shirt. His face was pale, almost waxy, and his hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage barely contained. He kept trying to speak, but Collins shut him down with a raised hand each time. "Save it for the judge," she said. "We've got video, we've got dogs, and we've got your name on enough shipping receipts to build a prison out of paperwork alone." The team cataloged over 30 living dogs, some no older than a few weeks, others clearly adults used for breeding or training. Several bore fresh sutures, shaved patches, and signs of chemical restraint. A few, heartbreakingly, showed signs of having been used in bite training without proper gear, muzzles too tight, mouths still bleeding. Elijah didn't speak. He just stood with his fists clenched at his sides, eyes scanning each crate as it was loaded into the transport vehicles bound for the temporary recovery shelter set up by Bright Paws and 2 regional rescue groups. It wasn't until the last van door slammed shut that he realized something was wrong. Only 4 of the puppies were there: Buddy, Maple, Dusty, and Theo, not Honey Ear. He turned sharply, walking quickly toward the lead vet tech. "Where's the 5th?" he asked. "Smallest one, honey-colored fur, left ear curled." The tech, young, curly-haired, flustered, flipped through her clipboard. "We were only given records for 4 under the Moore intake." "No," Elijah said, his voice rising. "There were 5. I named them myself." The tech hesitated. "We logged the dogs directly from your clinic, sir. Maybe someone moved her before transport." Sarah stepped in. "I did the final overnight rotation. She was there at 11 p.m. when I checked. I swear it." Clara pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. "This was taken yesterday afternoon." She showed the screen to the tech. 5 puppies in their recovery crate. Honey Ear curled next to Theo, clearly visible. "We need to check the surveillance tapes," Elijah said. An hour later, back at the clinic, they pulled the grainy footage from the security systems archive. The timestamp read 3:02 a.m., 2 days prior. The image showed a figure entering through the side door using a key, walking with confidence, not stealth. The figure wore a long coat with a hood pulled low and carried a dog crate under one arm. They paused by the recovery room, lifted Honey Ear from the crate, wrapped her in a towel, and left. The camera caught one moment when the hood shifted enough to reveal a partially bald head and a familiar profile. Sarah's face went pale. "Thomas," she whispered. "That's my ex-husband." Thomas Kendrick, Deputy Chief of County Patrol, longtime public servant, and the man who had buried every early complaint about Redstone under layers of bureaucracy and manipulation. Clara's jaw tightened. He had access, authority, and a reason to silence that puppy. Elijah stared at the screen. "Why take her?" Sarah didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, "Because she was evidence. Maybe she reminded him of something. Maybe she was chipped. Either way, someone wanted her gone without drawing attention." Just then, Luis arrived at the clinic, carrying a small backpack slung over one shoulder and an envelope in his hand. His hoodie was zipped up tight, and his sneakers were worn almost to the soles. "Elijah," he said, breathless, "I'm leaving. My abuela's sick. We're moving closer to my aunt in El Paso." Elijah blinked. "That fast?" Luis nodded. "Bus leaves tonight, but before I go, I need to give you something." He handed over the envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a folded printout. "I recorded this a few nights ago. Didn't know it mattered until now." They plugged it into Sarah's laptop. It was phone footage, time-stamped 3:06 a.m. The angle was shaky but clear. It showed a man carrying a bundled object toward a parked black sedan. As he opened the door and placed the crate inside, a small golden head peeked out. Honey Ear. The man looked around and for a brief second turned toward the camera. It was Thomas Kendrick. "Elijah," Luis said quietly. "That's the guy from the fence." Everyone turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Luis nodded slowly. "I was biking the morning I met you. I passed that stretch of road early. I saw someone walking away from the fence. I only saw the back, but same build, same walk." Sarah stared at the screen in horror. Elijah closed his eyes for a long moment. "We're not done," he said. "Not until she's back." The road to the breeding compound wasn't marked on any official map. It began behind a truck stop off I-27, twisted through rows of half-dead cotton fields, and finally dipped into a valley where old grain silos slumped like forgotten bones. Elijah followed it at dawn, dust curling behind his borrowed Jeep like breath from something hunted. He hadn't slept more than an hour, but the ache in his joints couldn't compete with the fire building in his chest. Sarah had stayed behind. She'd wanted to come, insisted in fact, but Elijah told her no. "If I'm wrong," he'd said, "you're the one they'll still listen to." She hadn't argued after that. Instead, she handed him a burner phone and the last known address of a man named Carter Bell, a disgraced breeder once tied to Redstone through a now-defunct shell company. Carter had gone underground after an animal cruelty case was dismissed on a technicality, but rumors placed him in the valley, running dogs off-grid, cash only. The compound was smaller than Elijah expected, 3 mobile homes joined by aluminum roofing sheets, 2 kennels with tarp roofs, and a trailer painted camouflage green. A ragged American flag flapped half-heartedly from a broken pole. It was still early, the air sharp with desert cold, and smoke curled from a tin chimney. Elijah parked out of sight and moved in on foot. He wore dark jeans, a gray hoodie, and gloves. In one pocket, he carried a multi-tool and a folded photograph. 5 puppies curled together in a crate. 4 of them were safe. 1 was still missing. He crouched beside a fence made of uneven wire and chain, listening. A soft whimper reached his ears, a high, thin sound, desperate but alive. He slipped through a gap and approached the smaller kennel. Inside, huddled against the far corner, was a small dog, golden cream fur, matted and dull. Her left ear still curled, but now crusted with dried blood. Honey Ear. He whispered her name, but she didn't lift her head. A noise behind him made him spin. Carter Bell stood on the porch, a hunched figure wrapped in a brown coat that reached his knees. He was in his 60s, with wiry white hair and a face like burnt leather. His right eye was clouded from an old injury, and his hands twitched at his sides like they weren't used to stillness. "You lost?" he called, voice gruff. "No," Elijah answered, stepping forward. "I'm here for her." Carter spat. "Ain't yours." Elijah reached into his pocket slowly and unfolded the photo. She was, and she will be again. Carter stared, unmoved. "You know what this is? It's business. Supply, demand. People want dogs, pure, trainable, loyal. That one failed out. Just another waste of feed." Elijah stepped closer, voice low. "She was found hanging from a fence, with 4 others. She lived. That means she gets to matter." Something shifted in Carter's face. Maybe defiance, maybe shame. He reached for the latch on the door behind him. Elijah moved before instinct could argue. One shove sent Carter stumbling, winded against the trailer wall. Elijah didn't hit him. He didn't need to. He opened the kennel, lifted Honey Ear gently into his arms, and walked away without another word. Back at Bright Paws, the reunion was quiet. The 4 other pups, now nearly 6 months old, greeted her with cautious tails and curious sniffs. Honey Ear didn't bark, didn't wag, just curled up beside Maple and fell asleep. But when Elijah sat beside her crate that night, her head rose slightly, and her paw slid across the blanket to touch his boot. The weeks that followed moved faster than Elijah was used to. A federal task force took over the Redstone investigation. Thomas Kendrick was placed on administrative leave pending formal charges. Malcolm Day faced multiple counts of animal cruelty and obstruction. Sarah was cleared to testify as an expert witness and brought back into public trust. And Elijah, quiet Elijah, who had once slept in a dead truck and lived in the margins, was offered a position as a consultant for a new pilot program, pairing rescue dogs with veterans in recovery. He accepted on one condition: they all go with me. And they did. Buddy became the most loyal, always at Elijah's side. Dusty grew bold, the first to bark when something was wrong. Theo liked to fetch things, tools, gloves, socks, whether you needed them or not. Maple was the calm center, always curled up at the feet of the most anxious soldier. And Honey Ear, she remained quiet, but her eyes never left Elijah. She didn't wag, she didn't bark, but she stayed. They each got new names too, official ones registered with the program. Buddy became Ranger, Dusty became Chase. Theo kept his name, he seemed to insist. Maple became Luna. Honey Ear stayed just that. She'd earned the right to keep something no one could take again. Clara came to visit often. She brought homemade treats, asked after each dog like a proud aunt. One afternoon, she pulled Elijah aside. "I've been thinking," she said. "It's time I stopped living like it all ended with him." He nodded. He didn't need to ask who. The next week, Clara filled out the paperwork to adopt Luna. "She's gentle," she said. "Like him." Sarah returned to her clinic full-time, now supported by county grants and 2 new vet techs. She worked longer hours than ever, but there was something lighter in her step. Like the weight she'd carried for years had finally been named, and in naming it, lost some of its power. Elijah, on Sarah's quiet suggestion, wrote down everything. The highway, the fence, the dirt, the names. The Dune Hollow Sentinel published it on the front page under the headline, "The Man Who Didn't Look Away." But Elijah's last line was the one people remembered. They were never trash. They were never broken. They were simply waiting for someone to care. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come in the shape of a man who's lost everything, except the courage to stop and kneel beside 5 forgotten lives. Sometimes they come as a puppy with a crooked ear, who should have died, but didn't, because someone chose to care. In a world that often moves too fast to notice pain, choosing to stop, choosing to love, is the purest kind of miracle. Perhaps it wasn't just Elijah who found those dogs. Perhaps God placed him there, at just the right moment, on just the right morning, to remind us all that every life is seen. So if you've ever wondered if small acts matter, they do. And maybe, just maybe, the quiet work of mercy is the closest we ever come to touching the hands of God. May the Lord bless every soul who chooses compassion over comfort, and may He bless you, dear viewer. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen, or share how you've seen compassion change lives. Subscribe for more real stories of redemption, healing, and hope. And please, share this video so the world remembers no life is ever trash in the eyes of God. May He watch over you and your loved ones, always.